Okay, I'm reading from the book of Children's Bible Stories, and I'm on section 22. The title is The Shining Serpent, and it is in reference to the book of Numbers, chapter 21. It was a long, long journey to Canaan. The Israelites had to go through dry deserts and over high hills, but God took care of them. He gave them water out of a rock, He gave them bread from heaven. Each morning, except on the Sabbath day, the bread lay upon the ground. They called it manna. But the Israelites were tired of traveling. They were tired of manna. They began to grumble and complain. God heard them grumble and complain. He saw that they were cross and angry. And one day God sent serpents into the camp to punish the Israelites who grumbled. The serpents crawled all around the camp. Between the tents, they bit many people, and many people died of the poison bites. Then the Israelites called to Moses, their leader. They said, "We have sinned. It was sinful to grumble and complain. Pray to God so that He will take the serpents away." Moses did pray, and God said to Moses, "Make a serpent of shining brass, put it on a high pole, and tell the people to look at the shining serpent. When they look at the shining serpent, they will be well." Moses quickly made the serpent of shining brass. He put it on a pole so high that people could see it from afar. Many people were very sick from the serpent bites, mothers and fathers and little children too. They all heard about the shining serpent, and when they looked at it, they were well. They did not die. Then the people thanked God for the shining serpent. Many, many years later, Jesus was lifted high upon the cross, and whosoever believes on Him is made well from all sins. Section 23, the walls of Jericho. It's in reference to Joshua chapter 6. There once was a big city called Jericho. The people who lived in Jericho were wicked people. They did not serve the Lord. They did not try to do His will. So God said that He would punish them. He would give their city to His own people. But all around the city of Jericho, there was a big high wall, a very strong wall. And the people of Jericho shut the gates of the city tight. They would not let anyone come in or go out. They saw the people of God outside the city, and they were afraid. Joshua was the leader of God's people then, and God told Joshua what to do. Joshua called the priests and all the soldiers. He told them to get in a line. He said they were going to march all around the city. First in line were soldiers, hundreds of them. Then came 7 priests. Each priest had a horn to blow. Then came 4 priests carrying God's ark. And at the end of the line, the rest of the soldiers marched. When they were all ready, the 7 priests blew their horns. Everybody began to march. Nobody talked. They only marched. Tramp, tramp, tramp. They marched all the way around Jericho. Then they went back to their tents. The next day they did the same thing. Tramp, tramp, tramp around the city. And the next day they did the same for 6 days. On the 7th day they were up early. Joshua said they must march around the city 7 times that day. He said that then God would give them the city. Early in the morning they started. Tramp, tramp, tramp. The priests blew their horns, but nobody talked. They marched around and around and around 7 times. Then Joshua gave the signal, and all the soldiers shouted. They shouted as loud as they could. And when they shouted, the walls of Jericho fell. The walls came crashing down. The soldiers could run right in and take the city. So God gave the city of Jericho to His people. Section 24, the title is Brave Gideon, in reference to Judges chapter 6 and 7. When God's people served Him, He blessed them. But there came a time when God's people forgot Him. They served other gods. Then God sent wicked men to punish them. These men stole the wheat and barley out of the fields. Then the Israelites called to God. They asked God to forgive them and help them. God heard their prayer. He forgave them. and he called Gideon to fight against the thieves. Gideon was not a brave man. He was afraid to fight. He gathered a big army, and still he was afraid. Then God said to Gideon, "Your army is too big." He let Gideon have just a little army. But the enemies had a much bigger army. The valley was full of soldiers. No wonder Gideon was afraid. But God told Gideon just what to do. In the night, he said to Gideon, "Take one of your soldiers, go down in the valley, listen to what the men in the valley say." Gideon and his soldier crept down the hill in the dark. They could see the great army asleep in the valley. When they came near, they heard two soldiers talking. One said, "I had a strange dream. A loaf of bread came rolling down the hill. It knocked the tent down." The other said, "That loaf of bread must be Gideon's army. God is going to give our whole army to Gideon." When Gideon heard that, he knew God would help him. Then he was no longer afraid. With God helping him, he was brave. Gideon hurried back up the hill. He woke his soldiers. He gave each one a trumpet, a water jar, and a torch. They put their torches inside the water jars to hide the lights. Then they crept quietly around. They made a circle all around the valley where the big army of enemies was asleep. They were all very quiet, and it was very dark. Then Gideon gave the signal. The men took out their torches and held them high. They threw down their jars, crashing them against the rocks. They blew their trumpets as loud as they could, and they shouted, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon." Such a bright light and so much noise. The big army in the valley scared awake. They did not know what was happening. They jumped up and ran, and Gideon's little army chased them. So the Lord saved his people when they prayed to him.